Hello, welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our 6th graders out there, though everyone is welcome to tune in. This lesson is the first in this week's series. My name is Megan Gilley, and I am a 6th grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. If you didn't see any of our previous lessons, or you would like to go back and watch this lesson, you can visit the Tennessee Department of Education's website at www.tn.gov/education. Today we will be reading a chapter from a book about the Berlin Wall. Before we get started, to participate fully in our lesson, you will need paper, a pen or pencil, and a firm surface to write on. I will take a minute while you pause to get your supplies. Okay, let's begin. In our lessons last week, we learned a lot about life in the Middle Ages, and you finished by writing a day in the life of either a serf or a lord, which showed how people lived during that time. I hope that you were able to share your writing with somebody. Today, our goal is to learn how an author develops a setting and character when he or she writes historical fiction. We'll begin by me showing you what that looks like as we read together, and then there will be some time for you to practice answering some questions and work on your own with my support. And then I will assign you independent work in the end that you can complete after the video ends. Let's talk a little about historical fiction before we begin. The term itself helps us to know the meaning. The word fiction is a made-up story, while historical refers to history, which is based on something true and has really happened. As we read literature, there are certain elements of historical fiction. One being the characters lived or could have lived in the time and place portrayed. So we're not likely to see an alien drop in World War II or anything like that. The events did occur or could have occurred in this setting. It's important that the author includes events that make sense during the historical time period. In addition to, the dialogue is made up, but may be based on historical letters, diaries, or reports. Dialogue is referring to the words spoken by characters. This is where the author can get really creative, even if he or she uses a source like a diary. Just to let you know, the story that we are reading is not based on specific historical documents. If you've read Number the Stars, Bud Not Buddy, War Horse, or The Little House on the Prairie, then you've read historical fiction. I personally love historical fiction because I can learn about an event in history and enjoy a good story. As we read our story for today, keep these historical elements in mind. We want to watch for the importance of a historical setting in the story. Location and events from the past can be an important part of the setting, so let's pay close attention to how the period and location affect the plot of the story. The title of the book that we'll be reading is The Wall. And when I see this picture of the front cover, I'm trying to think of a historical event that involves a wall. And I remember that there was a wall in the city of Berlin that separated East and West Berlin. The story actually does take place there. Let me show you a map. You can see that Germany is split into in Europe and was divided into East and West Germany. The pop-out shows the city of Berlin that was also divided in East and West sections. Here are a couple of pictures of the Berlin Wall. You can see how it was being built and constructed, as well as what it looked like during this time period. We will read more in our story about who controlled each side of this wall, but I will tell you that East Berlin was controlled by the communists, and they were responsible for putting up the wall. Walls can either keep people out or keep people in, or both. So we will learn more about the purpose of this wall as we read. Contents. What do you notice here that gives us a clue about the setting, the time or place, location? What do you notice? That's right. The chapters are arranged by date, so the reader knows exactly when the story takes place. Since I knew that the Berlin Wall was built in the city of Berlin, I did a little Google searching and found that on the night of August 12, 1961, East German soldiers laid down more than 30 miles of barbed wire through the heart of Berlin. Look at how that lines up with the dates on the chapters. What do you notice? Well, I noticed that chapter 1 happens the day before the wall was built, August 12, 1961, and the other chapters are after the wall was built. I'm ready to find out what happens. I think we'll need to remember that in 1961, there were no cell phones, email, or internet. Communication would have been much different then, so an actual wall would have been pretty scary. Today we are going to be reading Chapter 1 of The Wall. I think it will be helpful to set up a chart like you see on the screen to keep up with the story elements that we are looking for. So on your piece of paper, create a chart that looks like this. You can go ahead and add information on your chart about the setting because we know that it takes place in Berlin in August of 1961. We know that from the table of contents. Because this setting is in Germany, some of the names and dialogue that are in German, I will do my best with pronunciation, so bear with me. Are you ready? Let's begin Chapter 1. We start East Berlin, early morning. Schnell, schnell, Franz, you are going to be late for school. In his bedroom, Franz yawned as he stretched out of bed. He groggily reached over to his nightstand, blindly searching for an object he knew was somewhere on the wooden surface. His hand brushed the cool metal and smooth leather, so he closed his fingers around the object and brought it in front of his unfocused eyes as he slowly sat up. Franz blinked several times to get rid of the blurriness and read the face of his watch, 6:57 a.m. The first sentence is, Schnell, schnell, Franz, you're going to be late for school. Based on the rest of the sentence, what do you think the word schnell means? I agree. Schnell must mean hurry or quickly because he's going to be late for school. I also noticed the highlighted word groggily. I noticed that the word groggily ends in ly, which is a clue for helping me understand that this word is an adverb, meaning that it tells how something was done. So I'm picturing in the text, he's waking up and he's like groping for his watch, trying to find it. So I can infer that groggily means not what that says on the screen, but it means dazed or not quite clear. Here you can see that I've added what we know so far. Franz is the character and the setting is Berlin, August 1961. Franz groaned and thought, I could have had another 3 minutes of sleep. He threw his quilt aside, gave a longing glance at his comfortable pillow, and rose from bed, strapping the watch to his wrist as he did so. His now adjusted eyes scanned the closet for his jacket. When he finally caught sight of it hanging at the very end of the line of clothes, he rolled his eyes and sighed. He pulled it on slowly. It was as if the jacket were weighed down with rocks. Now Franz wondered which bothered him more, waking up early or the itchy clothes he had to wear to school. The door to Franz's room swung open, revealing his mother standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, wearing a look of admonishment. You're going to be late, she said, tapping her foot impatiently. It sounds like most of us, and here Franz is having a slow start to the day. Did you hear the word admonishment that's highlighted? His mother's arms were crossed. She was tapping her foot impatiently, saying, you're going to be late. I think that helps us understand what the word admonishment means. Yeah, I think it means that he's about to be in trouble. I checked a reference and found that the word admonishment is referring to a warning or a reprimand. Franz dismissed his mother's concerns with an incoherent, mumbled response. I wonder what he said to his mother. I know incoherent means not understandable. It was probably not understandable because he was mumbling, so it might have been something not very nice. Let's continue on. Again, Franz dismissed his mother's concerns with an incoherent, mumbled response and scurried past her toward the kitchen. He scooped up his school books and the case that held his pens and pencils. In the center of the kitchen table was a wicker basket filled with various types of bread rolls. Franz reached over and grabbed a plain roll, took a large bite, and muttered goodbye to his mother with his mouth still full. Did you hear the word scurried? What do you think that means? And it's highlighted on your screen. Let me reread that sentence again. Franz dismissed his mother's concerns with an incoherent, mumbled response and scurried past her toward the kitchen. I've heard the phrase scurried like a mouse, so it makes me think that Franz was trying to get out the door quickly and unnoticed by his mother. So scurried means moving quickly with short steps. Back to the text. The front door to the Mueller's apartment slammed shut as Franz hurried out into the hallway. He winced, knowing how often his mother had told him to close the door gently whenever he left. Hoping to avoid another lecture this early morning, he bolted down the hallway. I want to stop for a moment and talk about the highlighted word winced. I know it's a verb because it ends in ed and tells what he did. I used a resource and found that winced means to draw back from something that is potentially dangerous or painful. Have you ever had a shot at the doctor's office? You know, the pain is coming and you just can't help you wince. The way that the word is used in this sentence tells me that people can wince at things that are emotionally painful, things that hurt their feelings, not just physical pain. So let's continue in our story. Rounding the corner, he blurted out "Guten Morgen" to his neighbor. A startled Mrs. Schultz then flew down the stairs to the front entrance of the building. He was about to make his exit when he faintly heard his mother call out, "DT Air, Franz Mueller. What did I tell you about the door?" Now, there were a couple German phrases there. No laughing at my accent, please. Did you hear any words that made you think he is no longer scurrying? Yes, I heard it too, such as he flew down the stairs and he blurted out "good morning" to the neighbor. It sounds like he's running at full speed now so that he escapes more admonishment. Remember the word from his mother. As I read the next part, I want you to listen for what the author tells us about East and West Berlin, and I want you to jot down some notes as I read. The morning air was cool and damp, typical for Berlin. Franz paused for a moment in front of his building and inhaled deeply. It smelled distinctly like summer, but it didn't feel like summer anymore, not now that school was back in session. Franz sighed deeply and began his short trek or walk to school. A steady stream of pedestrians, young and old, lined the street. It was the morning rush when most East Berliners commuted to work or to school. A handful of Trabants, and I'll show you what that is. It is a car, zipped past Franz in the busy road, headed in the opposite direction. Anyone who lived in communist-controlled East Berlin and had a car was most likely using it to drive to a job in democratic West Berlin. From what Franz had heard his parents say, life over in West Berlin was much better than it was in East Berlin. He didn't know what was so great about it, but he knew that there were a lot of people leaving and not coming back. 5 classmates had moved to West Berlin with their families last year. Franz's father had even taken a job over there. It paid nearly twice what the same job would pay in East Berlin, but Franz didn't think it was worth the money. He barely got to see his father anymore. So we start to learn more about the historical setting here. What did the author tell us about East and West Berlin? You're right. We have some details that the weather was cool and damp at the end of the summer. East Berlin was controlled by the communists, and people who were able to had cars or Trabants, and they would go to East Berlin to West Berlin for work. We also learned a little bit more about Franz here. How does he feel about West Berlin? I thought that too. He didn't seem to think that West Berlin was that great, and he didn't like that his father worked there because he didn't get to see him very much. So as I read, I want you to listen for a historical detail related to the next character that we meet. Running late this morning, aren't you, Franz? Surprised, Franz snapped out of his daze and turned around. Oh, hello, Carl. Sorry, I guess I was daydreaming. Carl was in the uniform of the combat groups of the working class, a volunteer police force. Franz's father often complained that the group was just a way for the Soviets to strengthen their hold over East Berlin. Franz liked Carl, though. He always had a good joke or a funny story to tell. Well, it's a good idea to get daydreaming out of your system before class, said Carl with a grin. He glanced at his watch and laid a hand on Franz's shoulder. I have a great dog joke for you, but school is about to start. You better hurry. Franz looked down at his own watch, which now read 7:26 a.m., and began to run toward the plainly painted white brick facade of the school. As he hustled, it occurred to Franz he had only had 1 year left here before he would be leaving all of his friends, either to get a job or to become an apprentice. That's if I don't get expelled for being late again, Franz said to himself as he pulled open the door to the school building and ran inside as quickly as he could. What did you learn about Carl here that has historical significance? That's right. Carl was a member of the combat groups of the working class, a volunteer police force. That was a real organization during that time in history. But how does Franz's father feel about them? You're right. Franz's father often complained that the group was just a way for the Soviets to strengthen their hold over East Berlin. So it doesn't sound like he was a really big fan. And how here can we tell that Franz feels about Carl? I read in the text that he likes Carl because Carl always has a good joke or a funny story to tell. Let's continue on and pick up in this story. When school got out that afternoon, Franz headed directly home. His friends had asked him to stay and hang out, but he wasn't in the mood. He just wanted to be alone. He had found out that his best friend Roland was moving to West Berlin tomorrow night, and there was nothing he could do about it. I hate West Berlin, he thought. Slam. Franz? Sorry, Mother, he mumbled. He had forgotten about the door again. How is Franz feeling here? Yeah, we can tell that he's angry and upset, right? Are there clues in the text, certain phrases that give that away? Yeah, here we have, he just wanted to be alone. I hate West Berlin, he thought, and slam. That lets us know that he's angry and upset here. His best friend Roland is moving tomorrow, and that would upset me too. Despite his mother's frustration, she addressed him calmly without pausing from her dinner preparations. Dinner's ready, Franz, she said. I made Buletin, your favorite. Franz walked slowly into the kitchen and dropped his books onto the table. Danke, he muttered absently. His mother turned around to look at Franz, her expression a portrait of a mother's omniscience. She knew immediately that something was bothering Franz. Do you want to talk about it? She asked. So I like that Franz's mom has been described here as her expression of a portrait of a mother's omniscience. We are learning a lot about his mother through her expressions because earlier she had the look of admonishment and now she has this kind of omniscience look to her. Think about where you may have heard the word omniscience before. Were you thinking about the lessons you've had on point of view? I was. Remember, third person point of view is when the character is all-knowing and knows all the characters and feelings and thoughts and actions. So I'm picturing that his mother's expression showed that she knew that Franz was upset. Does it feel like moms know everything sometimes? Let's continue. No thanks, said Franz as he slumped down in his chair. He wasn't hungry and he definitely didn't feel like talking. Oh, your father called, remarked his mother, not pushing the topic. She placed Franz's plate in front of him. He had to work late again, so he'll be staying with Tante, Fran, for the night. He'll be home a bit earlier than usual tomorrow, though. Franz's reply was a barely noticeable nod. He and his mother ate their dinner in silence, and Franz washed up and crawled into bed immediately after. He felt his eyelids sink the moment his head touched the pillow. He slept so deeply that even the sounds of heavy construction in the middle of the night barely stirred him. When he heard someone shouting, "Mauer!" over and over again, he figured he was dreaming. He rolled over and let himself drift back to sleep. Mauer, you can see in the second to last sentence there, it's pronounced Mauer. And somebody is repeating it over and over again. It's a German word that means. All right, so we are going to come back to this chart. You have already listed Franz as a character. Are there other characters to add? We can add Franz's mom, and we can add Carl. We also already recorded that the setting was in East Berlin. Make sure you have that. But we could also add the apartment, the street, and the school. And I want you to think about what are the main events that take place in chapter 1. I wrote that Franz wakes up late and has to rush to school. Franz runs into his friend Carl, who is part of the volunteer police force. I'm like, what else happened? Well, after school, Franz goes straight home because he is upset that his friend will be moving to West Berlin the next day. Remember, it's okay to not have exactly the same events on your chart, but be sure that you've captured something from the beginning, middle, and end. There are many words that can help us grow as a reader, so I want you to think back to some of the words that may have been unfamiliar to you that we talked about, and we're going to review some of them right now. The author used the word groggily to describe how Franz reached for his watch when he woke up. Do you remember what groggily means? That's right. It means dazed or not quite clear. Can you write it in a sentence using the word groggily? Give it a try. Remember, it's an adverb that describes how something is being done. We also had read that Franz's mother had a look of admonishment. Let me reread that in the text. Oops. Admonishment. The door to Franz's room swung open, revealing his mother standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, wearing a look of admonishment. "You're going to be late," she said, tapping her foot impatiently. Remember that we found lots of clues to what kind of look she had. Her arms were crossed, tapping her foot impatiently, and from her words, "You're going to be late." I want you to draw a picture of how to show that you understand the word admonishment. And of course, it already flew up on your screen, but I want you to look at the word scurried, which means to move quickly with small steps. What words might the author have used opposite of scurried? For example, if the author would have used strolled, like you have seen up on the screen, he would have given the readers the idea that Franz was not in a hurry. How about the word winced? Can you make an expression on your face or with your body to show what wince looks like? Again, wince means to draw back from something that is potentially dangerous, or painful, either emotionally or physically. And another phrase that we looked at was her expression, a portrait of a mother's omniscience. That provided us with a great way to imagine his mother's look. In a portrait or a picture, someone is still, so there she is, not moving, but knowing what Franz is feeling. So we know she's able to feel what he is feeling or understand it, and she is still there. This chapter has really caught my attention, and I'm looking forward to reading what happens next. So today we've read chapter 1 of this work of historical fiction. We know that the setting is a real time and place in history. And in this first chapter, we learn a lot about East and West Berlin, but most of the events, getting up late, going to school, finding out bad news, could happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. So I wonder how the events in the next chapters will be influenced by this specific time in history, August 1961, and the place, East Berlin. So to capture your thoughts from chapter 1, I want you to write a summary of the events using the notes on your chart to the left. Then write a paragraph about what you think might happen next. Be sure to include events from the beginning, middle, and end of the chapter, important characters, and the setting in your summary. Once you have written your paragraphs, go back and check for correct punctuation and capitalization. Make sure that each sentence expresses a complete thought. Add transition words to help a reader follow the flow of your ideas. Transitions could be words like first, next, then, last, also, while, finally. So have fun with the writing assignment. I have enjoyed reading the beginning of the historical fiction book with you today, The Wall. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's At Home Learning Series. Have a good day. Bye.